Last week, Bijan Robinson, Chris Godwin, Terry McLaurin, DeAndre Swift, Trey McBride, Breece Hall, Deontay Johnson, Tony Pollard, and Justin Fields went off in fantasy football, and they helped people win their weeks. And on last week's version of this very video, we told you to start every single one of those names. We hit on 9 out of 10 player takes. And ladies and gentlemen, we're on a heater. This week, I'm bringing you 10 names that will do the same, 10 names who will dominate. My hit rate through 6 weeks is 68%. So the first player that I think is going to dominate here in week 7 is Brian Robinson versus the Carolina Panthers. By the way, if Brian Robinson is ruled out, he's practicing, which is good. But if he is ruled out, Austin Eckler, put him in place. He'll be my start of the week. He would be my RB18 if there was no Brian Robinson this week. But the matchup is incredible. In fact, Carolina is the best matchup when you adjust for schedule and fantasy points allowed to the running back position. Every single running back has gotten theirs versus the Panthers defense. It's been a free-for-all. Alvin Kamara, J.K. Dobbins, Chase Brown, DeAndre Swift, Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, every single one of those names over 20 points outside of Algier, who just barely missed out. These guys are all dominating every single week versus this defense. Every running back gets theirs versus the Panthers. It's a free-for-all. And if you look at their defense this year, they're top 4 in the most rushing yards allowed per game, the most total yards allowed per game, and the most total points allowed per game. They're giving up almost 5 touchdowns worth of points per game. And this is the highest over-under of the week, 51.5 points. And Washington has the highest implied team point total on the week at 30 total points. And by the way, Brian Robinson has been a touchdown machine in this incredible offense. He is 5th in rushing touchdowns this year, and he missed a game with an injury. I'm projecting at least 80 yards, a touchdown, and 16 plus PPR points for Brian Robinson or Austin Eckler if it's him. The second player that's going to dominate, that is Mike Evans versus the Baltimore Ravens. All right. My wide receiver 8 on the week. Baltimore is the second best matchup for your wide receiver when you adjust for schedule. Devontae Adams went off 26 points. Jamar Chase went off 41. T. Higgins in the same game with 29. Terry McLaurin last week with 23. And we told you to start Terry McLaurin last week on this very video. The point is, it's free access versus the Ravens secondary. It's Swiss cheese. Mike Evans is going to have one of his boom games. Ravens defense allows the second most passing yards per game. But more specifically, if you look at points allowed to outside wide receivers who play on the outside, aka Mike Evans, Baltimore gives up the second most points to outside wide receivers, and this game projects to have a ton of points. We could see a ton of fantasy cheese, 48.5 point over under. I'm projecting another boom game for Mike Evans. I'm projecting 80 yards, a touchdown, and 18 plus PPR points. All right, this takes us to my spicy hot bold take of the week. Drake May, the young rook in his second ever career start, is going to fly across the pond to London, finish as a top 10 fantasy quarterback after giving the Jaguars a spanking in an underdog win. Now, look, I know at the time of recording this, a new injury just popped up for Drake May with his knee. However, according to Chris Mason, who is a beat writer for the Patriots, he mentioned that the knee issue didn't limit him at all in practice. He also held usual Wednesday morning press conferences for New England's starting quarterback, so there is nothing out of the norm here. We've heard from multiple reporters that his knee is good. It was just precautionary and that he should play. So Drake May going to London. The Jags are the best matchup for your quarterback in fantasy football when you adjust for schedule. Josh Allen almost had a 40 burger on them. CJ Stroud had 27 points. Joe Flacco coming off the bench, 3 touchdowns, 32 fantasy points. And then Caleb Williams last week, his best ever game as a rookie, as a professional, 37 points, 4 passing touchdowns. The Jaguars are top 2 in most passing yards allowed per game, total yards allowed per game, and total points allowed per game. And Drake May in his first start versus a tough Houston Texans defense had 26 fantasy points through 3 touchdowns, had some rushing upside, which isn't a fluke. We've seen him rush a lot in his collegiate days. And the New England Patriots scored 21 points. That is incredible because the first 5 weeks they were averaging about 11 points per game without Drake May. He's got that it factor. It's the perfect matchup for him to continue to be a great fantasy asset. And I'm putting my money where my mouth is, by the way, because in my home league, Dak Prescott's on a bye, and I am starting Drake May off the waiver wire. All right, we're projecting at least 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a top 10 finish. My fourth and fifth player this week is Chuba Hubbard and Diontae Johnson at the Washington Commanders. My running back 16 and wide receiver 15 on the week. Washington is the 12th best matchup for your running backs and the third best matchup for your wide receivers. Again, when you adjust for schedule against running backs, you can see Rachaad White had his best day this year against the Commanders. Zach Moss had a touchdown and 20 points. James Conner had 18. Derrick Henry did his thing. You can score points as a running back against this defense. They have gotten better, but you can still beat them. And for wide receivers, it's been free for all. Chris Godwin and Mike Evans both had a day. Malik Neighbors, that was his breakout as a rookie. Jamar Chase, almost 30 points. Zay Flowers last week without a touchdown, over 22 PPR points. Here's the deal for the Panthers. Not a good team, right? But Chuba Hubbard and Diontae Johnson are the entire offense. What do I mean by that? Well, Chuba Hubbard, since week 2, this is where he ranks amongst the NFL. Second in rushing attempts, second in rushing yards, third in targets amongst running backs. He is third in fantasy points amongst running backs, and sixth in points per game amongst the running back position. The dude has been dominating. I mean, he's been a league winner. Let's just hope Jonathan Brooks doesn't come back soon if you own him. And then Diontae Johnson, in that span with Andy Dalton as a starter, week 3 onwards, he is third in targets, 8th in receptions, 9th in receiving yards, 6th in fantasy points, and 10th in fantasy points per game, averaging over 18 per clip. When you have two players that get the vast majority of that fantasy pie, and you have a quarterback like Andy Dalton who's distributing, I mean, you've got a recipe for success. So they're going to be down, but these two players will literally be their entire offense. I'm projecting Chuba 90 plus yards and 15 plus PPR points. Diontae Johnson at least 80 yards, 6 receptions, and 15 plus PPR points as well. All right, last week we said to start Tony Pollard on this very video series, and that was great. You never walk away from a heater, ladies and gentlemen. We're putting Tony Pollard straight back into our lineups with a ton of confidence, even in smaller leagues. My RB10 on the week. Buffalo is the second best matchup for your fantasy running back. The Bills so far this year. Devon Achane had his best day. Derrick Henry had almost 36 points. Dare Agumba-Wale had almost 15 PPR points. And last week, Breece Hall had the bounce back that he needed. He was on this very video. He had the bounce back he needed, went absolute hamburger, 6.3 yards per carry, almost 22 fantasy points. The Bills defense is giving up the 10th most rushing yards per game, and they're giving up 5.3 yards per carry, which is the highest in the NFL. You can definitely run on this team. You can't pass on them. You can run on them. And by the way, even with Tajay Spears in the lineup, Tony Pollard was already one of the most used running backs in the NFL when you look at percentage of teams rushing attempts, target share, etc. And now Tajay Spears is not going to play this game. I mean, could we see 25 touches for Tony Pollard this week? How can this guy fail in a great matchup with no Tajay Spears? I'm predicting at least 20 touches and 16 plus PPR points. All right, the 7th player that is going to go off this week, that is Jordan Addison. I really like Jordan Addison this week. Detroit is the 4th best matchup for your wide receivers. Cooper Kupp did his thing in week 1. Chris Godwin did his thing. Marvin Harrison had one of his better games as a pro. And then DK Metcalf had 15 PPR points despite not having a touchdown. The Lions, you cannot beat them on the ground. This is one of the better rush defenses in the NFL. You can beat them through the air. They're giving up the 6th most passing yards per game. This is one of the higher over-unders of the week, 49.5 points. And the Vikings are currently tied for 3rd in the highest implied team point total of the week with 26, almost 4 touchdowns is their implied team point total. And since Addison has been back, his usage has been very favorable. First game back in week 4, he had 4 targets, but they were up the entire game. They didn't put him out on the field very much. The week after that, they played the Jets, which is a terrible matchup, but he had 8 targets. I'm projecting at least 70 yards, 15 plus PPR points. English is hard. Why is the word prediction hard to say today? I don't know, but we're going to keep going. The 8th player that we think is going to dominate, J.K. Dobbins. They used to call him one leg J.K. Now he's got 2 legs doing his thing. Look, the Cardinals are a middle of the pack matchup. You can see James Cook had 13 points. Kyron had 15. Monty had 21. Brian Robinson did his thing. So you can beat this team with your running back. And you can see they are top 10 in rushing yards allowed per game, in yards per carry allowed per game, in total yards allowed per game. But this is less about the matchup. And this is more about the fact that the Chargers are letting J.K. Dobbins carry their offense on their back. I mean, the dude is the offense right now. You can see in week 6, he had a season high snap percentage at 73%. He had his second highest rushing attempt share at 68%. And he had 100% of the carries inside the 5-yard line. And it took a while for him to get there, right? But the man touched the ball 27 times last week. I'm predicting at least 20 touches, 90 plus yards, and 17 plus PPR points for him. All right, the 9th player who I think is going to play well, Tyreek Hill. I know, no Tua Tagovailoa, I hear you. But I think there's a reason beyond Tua as to why Tyreek hasn't been good. But this is a good matchup. The Colts are the 9th best matchup for your wide receivers. You saw Nico Collins do his thing, as well as Stephon Diggs in the same exact game. George Pickens had his best game of the year, over 16 PPR points versus this defense. Brian Thomas went for 122 and 1 TUD. I mean, the Colts defense right now, top 7 in passing yards allowed per game and the 3rd most total yards allowed per game. And look, again, Tyreek has not been great, but oddly enough, Tyreek has not only dealt with bad quarterback play, but he has dealt with a terrible schedule since Tua left. If you look at schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed, shout out to 4 for 4. You can see in week 1, he faced the Jacksonville Jaguars. He did great, but they give up the most points to fantasy wide receivers right now. But from week 2 onwards, Buffalo was 24th in points allowed. Seattle was 19th. Tennessee gave up the fewest, right? And New England was 21st in points allowed. So he just hasn't even had a good matchup. So it's been bad quarterback play and a bad matchup. Last time out, he had 10 targets. The bye week should have given them an opportunity to have more plans for him. I think he gets at least 8 targets, 80 yards, and 15 plus PPR points. This will be his best game without Tua so far. And the 10th player who I think is going to play really well, Brock Bowers at the Rams. My tight end 1 in my rankings this week. The Rams are 9th in points allowed. 2 tight ends when you adjust for schedule. Look, Brock Bowers has free reign of this offense now. Brock Bowers is the offense. No Devontae Adams. He's going to drown in targets. I mean, how much better can he get? He's already been so good on the year. 11 points in his debut, then 18, 23 points in week 5, 16 points in week 6. I think the guy's going to get 10 plus targets and 15 plus PPR points. There's not a single league where you don't start Brock Bowers. Alrighty, I believe those players are going to dominate this week. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Do me a favor, hit that like button to show some love. Subscribe if you like the content. And the last thing I'll say is if you don't have a free account over on Flock Fantasy yet, go sign up with the promo code LAND for a free account. You'll get access to some cool tools like expert consensus rankings, the league analyzer, the trade calculator. And if you need a question answered this week, for example, a start sit, a trade question, then check out the pinned comment where you can actually ask us a question at any time this week and I will answer it for you. I appreciate you for watching. Good luck this week. Let's go get a win. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.